it's a privilege to invite Nico Taylor, she, her, who's a performance and digital artist, curator, and scholar with a Master's of Arts from Concordia University. She's also the co-founder and co-lead at Oddside Arts, a not-for-profit cultural arts organization that merges arts, technology, and wellness. Through her work at Oddside Arts, she has contributed to the creation and curation of exhibitions, public art projects, STEAM programming for youth, and cultural events centering African diasporic communities. Welcome, Nico.
Hello, everybody. I'm so excited to be here. You'll have to give me a little grace. This is the first online webinar I've done in a while. I've been in person a lot, working with kids actually. So I might be doing some things that I would normally do to kind of pump up the kids and get them to be interactive. So I want to start by first sharing my screen so you can all see my lovely presentation that I had prepared. Can everyone see that? Thumbs up? Okay, so we're going to be talking about sourcing grants within and outside arts funding streams. A little bit about me, which was already shared. As you know, I am the co-founder and co-lead of Oddside Arts. And there we do all kinds of artistic endeavors, from workshops to events to public art. And we actually started in 2020, so in the midst of the pandemic. And when I was asked to do this workshop, at first I was like, I don't know, do I know about this stuff? But it's because I've been so steeped in it, I didn't realize that it's kind of been embedded in the way that we carry out, the way that we work in the arts industries. So I want to start with getting to know a little bit about all of you, and you can choose to turn your camera on or you can just use the emojis to react. But I wanted to know how many of you in this room are artists. Okay, we got some waves. Hands up, thumbs up, fabulous. Okay, good to know. And how many of you have an arts organization, are part of an arts organization? Okay, some folks. Excellent. All right, that's good for me to know as I'm taking you through. Okay, so agenda. What I want to talk to you all about. So first, identifying, how has the funding landscape shifted since 2020? Then we're going to talk about social impact. Then we're going to start looking at different ways where you can kind of find and source grants. Then we're going to diversify our funding, or start thinking about how we diversify our funding. And lastly, I want to finish off with teaching you a little bit of tips and tricks for grant writing that I have picked up that I think will be very valuable and useful to you. And I'll also have some time for you to ask me specific questions about grants. And if I don't have the answer right then please feel free to email me, and I'll give my email with any questions that you have. Myself and my other co-founder at Oddside, we love passing on knowledge whenever we can. So please don't be frightened. Reach out. We'd love to hear from you. All right, so a breakdown of events from 2020 and onwards. So starting with COVID-19, which basically shut down the world, and you saw a really big change happening in the artistic landscape because we no longer could meet in person to do the work that a lot of arts organizations were doing before, and artists as well. And then you had the resurgence of BLM with the murder of George Floyd in 2020, all the protests that happened across the world. And as a result, you saw the creation of certain programs and initiatives because there was a call out of art galleries and industries across Canada and around the world that had created barriers for Black artists. So we were really starting to hold these institutions accountable. And you did see some shift happening there. So you'll notice that August 1st is now Emancipation Day, and that's recognized federally across all of Canada. That came into place in 2022. The month of August is also Emancipation Month. So that also is it's just in Toronto. and that also came into place in 2022. Then you have Indigenous reconciliation, so reconciling with the unmarked graves that were found across Canada, and how do we support our Indigenous communities? So you saw that with the changing of the name for TMU. There's now a National Day for Truth and Reconciliation on September 30th, and there's National Indigenous History Month in June. And now we have, global warming. We saw the effects of it last summer with all of the forest fires that were happening across Canada, in Montreal and different areas. And that's going to continue to be a concern. So you also see that the funding arena is addressing that as well. How do we talk about sustainability? How do we practice that in the arts sector? And then there's global unrest that we're seeing, currently with Israel and Palestine, with Ukraine, with Congo, and mining for cobalt to create all of the technological devices that we use. And the cyber attacks, the Toronto Public Library just had one where hackers hacked their databases and shut down their computers. It happened to the Toronto Zoo. It happened to hospitals, the Sick Kid Hospital here, and it's going to continue happening as more of our lives become online and more data is stored online. Do you all remember when Rogers shut down?
Yes.
Yeah, and we couldn't get access to 911, and you couldn't withdraw money, and that was just Rogers shutting down. So now think about if there was some sort of, digital attack on our infrastructure.
That's why I carry cash.
Exactly. Do we need to start thinking about having like a stowaway fund in case of these things? Because something like that could shut down our whole network. Okay, and then I want to talk about, how is this affecting funding? So you've seen more funds rolling out to assist with online operations during the pandemic, followed by an increase in getting more art onto the street once the world opened back up. So we have the Year of Public Art that happened in Toronto, and you saw an explosion of art in the streets of Toronto from 2021 to 2022 and kind of bleeding over to 2023. You also saw how a lot of these funding organizations were, giving funds for PPE equipment or for more organizations to be able to do more things online. As a result, OTF, the Ontario Trillium Foundation, created the Resilient Communities Fund. Now that's no longer available, but OTF does still have some really great funding programs, so I recommend checking them out. And then we saw more culturally sensitive and equity-focused funding programs. So for instance, and myself and my business partner actually was in one of these focus groups, but TAC reached out to Black community members to start thinking about a more concentrated line of funding that would address Black artists. And what came out of that was the project funds for Black artists, as well as an operating stream. And then there's now the Foundation for Black Communities that was founded in 2020, and they were selected to steward $200 million to invest in Black-led and Black-serving organizations. So that means that this money is going to be coming down over the next couple of years. We already saw the release of the first bout of it. The grant was due near the beginning of February. But as the year continues and a couple of years continues, there's going to be more funding for Black-led and Black-serving communities coming from that endowment fund. We also saw more funding focusing on developing local communities, thinking about future-proofing. So funds being directed into communities that are experiencing gentrification, for instance, cultural hotspots has gone into Little Jamaica. If you've been into Little Jamaica recently, there's been, because of the development with Metrolinx and what they're building there, that shut down that community for like 13 years. So many businesses have closed, Black businesses have closed. So the last 2 years, cultural hotspots went into that community to do artwork, create programming, just to help create some sort of economic balance for what was going on. And now they're going into Jane and Finch. So programs that are focusing on communities that are really suffering due to some sort of external force. Or you're seeing, funds that are thinking more about sustainable practices when it comes to existing in our communities. So this results in having a focus on social impact. So by social impact, I mean supporting organizations, activities, programs, projects that are predicated on having a positive impact or positive effect on communities and or the well-being of people. So if you are working with a nonprofit organization, you normally have like a social good that drives what you're doing. This can also be added to a certain project or a certain program that you're orchestrating. So you want to have your programs or your projects be intentional about what your social impact is. So for instance, what underrepresented group will you be able to assist with the work that you're doing? Is there a community engaged component or activation that will add financial or social benefit to the neighborhood that your work is concentrating in? Are you contributing to a larger dialogue? These are all things that are good to think about when you're doing your artwork or you're applying for a grant that is, targeting these areas, what they call like philanthropy funding. Okay, and then I wanted to give you all some funding sources that you should consider. And I've color-coded them. So ones that are more geared towards organizations, specifically not-for-profit or charity organizations, and then ones that individuals can also apply for. So starting with organizations, Toronto Vital Signs from Toronto Foundation is a really good one. The focus is on community there. As I mentioned, Ontario Trillium Foundation, they don't have their Resilient Communities funding, but they do have a Youth Opportunities Fund. So this is all about like teaching youth different skills, helping them develop, knowledge in a certain art practice or how they can contribute to their communities. Then there's Bell Let's Talk Diversity Fund. That's a really good one as well. TELUS has one for specific for Indigenous communities. And the Foundation for Black Communities, which I mentioned, with that $200 million endowment, that's one to look out for. Black Opportunities Fund, with their diversity fund. And then looking at banks, because banks like TD and Scotiabank, Desjardins, they also have like a community initiative component to what they're doing. So it's important to go onto those websites and search for those specific things to see that how you can apply and be a part of that. Even the MBA Foundation has something that they do with communities that you can apply for funding. Cooperators as well, which is insurance, has a program that you can apply for and get funding from. So think about areas in which you wouldn't normally go to that you can maybe sneak in and find out what the funding is going on there. And then individually, RBC has an emerging artist program. I recommend doing residencies, not just because they can give you experience and you can, experiment with a different way of approaching your art practice, but also because it's a good way to reach out to other organizations or work with other artists, or a good way to network and therefore bring in more eyes into what you're doing and more people who might want to fund you afterwards. So a good one that I have previous experience with is Steps Create Space. They're really good, especially if you're an emerging artist and you want to get into doing some public art. So public art, whether it be like sculptural work, whether you want to do a performance out on the street, anything that's like in an area where the public would be able to interact and access what you're doing. Lakeshore Arts Black Emerging Residency is something that's happening right now. So that's one I saw, and it would be a good idea for people to apply to. And then there's artistcommunity.org that has actually a directory of residencies that you could apply to that are not just Canada focused. They're also looking at places in the States as well. So the only contingency I would say is if you're applying for a residency, I recommend that you are getting some sort of honorarium to be compensated for the work that you're putting in and your travel and all of these things that you will be doing to create the piece that you present at the end of it. Another good one is to look into universities. OCAD, U of T, TMU, Ottawa School of Art all have call outs for artists to be residents for specific months at a time. In the chat, somebody mentioned NIA. So NIA also has a program where they will bring in a artist in residence for a couple months. And with these universities as well, because they have different student groups and they are able to access certain academic funding. Sometimes if you collaborate with a student group or a group department within the organization, you might be able to have your organization come in to either work on something that they're studying, something that they're interested in observing, or even do an event for them. So really try to connect with your local university. And then there's transit art call out. So the TTC, Union Station, Go Transit have call outs for artists that go on throughout the year. There's one that recently happened for Black History Month. I saw one for TTC to put designs on the pillars and one of the subway stations. Union Station will have now with what they've done to redevelop it, they have spaces to display art. So keep an eye on Union Station because they also make call outs. And as I mentioned, the City of Toronto Cultural Hotspot is a really great organization to work with. They're great people. You can really do a lot of good there. And get to know your BIAs and community orgs. So BIAs are business improvement areas. Every neighborhood has a BIA and they're normally in charge of working with the businesses in your area. And one of the things that they do is activate the street. So they'll put on festivals, they'll have temporary art pieces. And in the winter, they do some of them do these window displays and they have call outs throughout the year for artists to come help, or you could even pitch to them and be like, I'm interested in doing this with my community. Would you be able to help? And there might be some funding that you can access through your BIA or through your community organization. Okay, so now I want to talk about diversifying your funding because I don't want you to just think about arts grants as the only funding that can help you to develop as an artist or to keep your organization afloat. And first, I want to start by breaking down our funding sources in 2023. So as a part of our strategic plan, what we did is visualize where our funding was coming from, which is something that we never did before. And I really recommend if you haven't, do it. Or if you want to think about start thinking about, your funding and getting outside of the grants, this is a good exercise. So what we learned is that, about 45% of the funding that we were getting for our organization was coming from arts grants. The other 50%, it's a bigger amount, is coming from fee for service. And fee for service is when an organization, a municipal group, a BIA or a university department, etc., would come to us and be like, I have this amount of funds. I want to do a project or have a project done on this theme. Would you like to do it? Or they would invite us to do an event. For instance, we worked with OCAD-U to do a Black homecoming event for their Black alumni and their students and their staff. And we've done that 2 years now. We did it the year before and then the year that just passed. Also panels, people might come to you and be like, I know you have expertise in this certain area. Can you come and do this panel to talk about it? That was another source of funding that was coming for fee for service, or doing a workshop. You have a certain expertise, pass that information on to other folks. And then through discussions with other organizations, which are much bigger, pulling in a lot more funding than we are, we learned that arts funding actually makes up about 20 to 30% of their overall operational funding. That's what they're getting from arts councils. All the other funding was coming from foundations, donations, other, fee-for-service work that they were doing. So my suggestions that I have on a way to start diversifying your funding is one, identify what other areas your art practice addresses. So, don't just think about, I'm making art for art's sake and I should only be within that industry or realm. Think about how it translates to other things. So, for instance, can you take what you're doing on and maybe apply it to someplace like CIRA, the Canadian Internet Registry Association, and think about what your art project can do to also talk about online safety? Can you also break down your art practice or projects to also think about how they also offer a service? So turning your project into a workshop on visual literacy is one way. Or if you're someone who makes short films, maybe adding an educational toolkit that goes along with your short films. So, when you show your short film in a school or in a festival, you can offer this toolkit as a learning activity for your audience or to give a workshop on to get more information on a specific theme. And then the most important one is learning your pitch. So you'll need to understand your artistic drive and be able to communicate that with other people. And, being in the art sector also requires that you network. And I know some people don't like that term. Some people see it as schmoozing. You're going to these events, it's tiring, it can be draining. But the way that I suggest you approach it is more like, hey, how can I support the artists in my community that are doing amazing things? And by that, also tell them about myself. And I'm also doing amazing things. So my suggestion is to, get to know other community organizations and develop an interest in how you can collaborate. And then make an effort to attend events that are taking place in your area and get to know the MPP of your area as well, because that can also help you widen or broaden what you're able to access. And, networking also requires that you be face to face with folks, not just online. So you can broaden your reach online, but also get out in your community and be present and, start building those relationships. And a good place to start is by subscribing to newsletters. So TAC, OAC, and CAC, which are all the big arts councils, all have email lists. So, I recommend making sure that you're on those lists. Steps Public Art, I really like because they'll often tell you about art call outs from different areas, not just in Toronto, but all around, in different events or different people that are doing events that you can go to. Akimbo is really good. So if you're not receiving Akimbo email blasts, then I really recommend those as well. There's a lot of interesting things that go on there, actually, not just telling you about, art calls to apply to, but also about different really cool exhibitions all around Canada that might be of interest to you. And then I put Keela on there because Keela is a really good source for getting certain templates. Like if you want to figure out, okay, I want to start thinking about my revenue and really start making an operational budget, but I don't know where to start. Keela can help you with that. They're like a fundraising platform, but also a way to teach you about finance and business. And sometimes as artists, we might not realize that we also need to have a business acumen when we're in this field. So Keela is a really good place to start developing that. Okay, and now I'm going to give you my tips and tricks for grant writing. So my first tip is to create a master document. So when you approach these grants, a lot of them will kind of ask you for the same preliminary information about you or about your organization. And if you start putting these things in one document that you just go to this thing and you know where it is and you can just copy and paste. It will save you so much time. So put your mandate in there, your mission, key pillars, your bio, put the description of your art practice, a paragraph about what inspires you and the things that you make. If you work with community, write about put your community engagement plan in there as well. So it's just all contained. And as you apply to grants, maybe as you're writing, some new things would have come up, make sure you're adding that into that document just to make it a lot easier for yourself. Okay, and then use ChatGPT, but sparingly. Do we have people who are avid ChatGPT users in here?
I'm afraid of it.
Are you? How come?
I'm old school, man. It's a foreign entity for me.
Yeah, I hear you. I also was not very keen on ChatGPT as well, until I realized how to use it in a way that makes sense for me. So for instance, if I'm brainstorming something, I want to get ideas about how do I talk about this thing? Give me some options. It's really great for that. Sometimes I write in a grant and I get stuck on a sentence that's not sounding right. Then I'll go to ChatGPT and ask it to rephrase it for me. That's really helpful. And one thing that I realized that it could do that a friend of mine actually showed me and I hadn't even considered, I don't know if anybody else is like this, but when I'm writing a grant, I tend to overwrite. Like if the word count is 250, I'm giving you like 350, 400. And I realized, or I was shown that you can go to ChatGPT and say, hey, shorten this paragraph for me to 250 words. And it can do that while still making it concise and understandable. And that's really helpful because sometimes it can save you a lot of time. I find when you're trying to cut out sentences in an answer, often you feel like everything is important. And ChatGPT is like that objective eye to be like, okay, well, let's scratch this, this, and this because it's repetitive and keep it to the bare bones so you can get down to that word count that you want. So I really recommend playing with it for that. Then a good practice is also to reference studies in your grant. So if you want to make your grant stronger and make your case stronger, then it's helpful to also go, there's people who you might think that what you're writing about is really unique, but there are some studies that you can reference to maybe pull a statistic. Statistics Canada is a good one. Pull a statistic, pull out a study that has already kind of talked about, or a little bit in reference to what you're speaking to, and just put that in there or put, one of those valuable quotes. And that way people can see, okay, one, you've done your homework and you're passionate about this. And two, it gives the jury/audience, it helps legitimize what you're doing and shows why it's needed. And then also realize that grant writing is like storytelling. So it's sometimes we see it as, it bogs you down and it's just all of this factual information that we're putting in. But when you think about it as creative writing, it really opens up how you speak about the work, how you speak about yourself, how you accomplish the work. And that's really what it is. It's weaving narratives. So if you are a good storyteller, then grant writing, can be a breeze for you. If you're not a good storyteller, like everything, it takes practice. And it's just a matter of learning, what are the things that make sense. Speaking it out with somebody is a good way too. Pitch your idea for your grant to a friend and be like, does this make sense to you? And if they're like, yeah, I think that's great, then, go ahead and write the grant. What's really great now too, a lot of these granting bodies will allow you to have an oral way of submitting what you want to write, what you want to do. I know TAC does that. I think OAC does that as well, and other granting bodies that will allow you to like book an interview so you can talk about what you want to do instead of having to fill it out in a form. A really good idea as well is to make note of those keywords. So when you're going through the grant and you're like, oh, I noticed that this word inclusion is really coming up a lot as I'm reading these questions. Or I noticed that this word equity seeking seems to be appearing in a lot of these questions or a lot of these descriptors. Maybe I also need to be talking about that in my answers. So use that to guide how you approach your answers. And you'll see keywords. Once you're attuned to it, you'll really see keywords popping out everywhere along the grant. And those can also help you do some research and find those studies that can prop up the the grant applications that you're filling out. And then another suggestion is speaking to granting bodies. So every granting body will have like a grants officer, or they'll provide you with a contact. And I recommend, just emailing to have an introduction and to being like, I'm interested in applying. Could I speak to you for about 15 minutes about my idea to see if it aligns? And it's a good way to put like a face to the name. They won't tell you exactly how to apply. They won't give you a cheat sheet, but it'll be a good idea to know to get a sense of if you're going, or if you're doing the right thing, if what you're thinking about doing aligns with what they're going to provide funding for. And then if you are to, you fill out the application, unfortunately, you didn't receive the grant, follow up and get advice about, how can you make this grant stronger, not just for that particular funding, or maybe something else that you're applying for. And then importantly as well, make a grant list. This is something that we put into effect this year and has really helped us like streamline the grants that we're applying for, because we know all of our deadlines. We know, what grant goes for which organization and what it's about. We also know which project would fit. So once you, really start grant writing and start applying for funds, for multiple funds to prop up one project, which I recommend. So instead of, having a program and only applying for funding from one grant to sustain that program, I recommend looking at various granting bodies that can help fund different parts of that program. A good place to start if you want to start building your grant calendar or your grant list is Outreach. And I'll show you what it looks like. And I really like Outreach because they create like a calendar. So let me stop. I think I only shared this particular page. So let me stop sharing and show you what Outreach looks like. There we go. Oh, you're seeing my Zoom difficulties. Okay, so this is outreach.org, and it has all of the deadlines on a calendar for you from various art organizations and funding sectors. So you can just click on one, see what it is, see when it's due, and you can copy it to your own Google Calendar, or just visit the site and go through what's happening in February, what's happening in March. You can see which months are most active. It's a really good space to get you aware of like what's going on in the funding industry. So I highly recommend, tapping into this Outreach grant calendar. It's been really useful for me. And whenever somebody asks me, what are the grants that are out there, this is where I direct them to. Okay. And then if you're, stuck thinking about, okay, when I'm working on my budget, I don't know how much to allocate for, to pay an artist, to do a workshop. I'm not sure how much I should be paying myself when breaking down this budget. Carfac is a really good source to have in the back of your mind. It talks about, what are the equitable fees that you should pay minimum for the amount of work, whether it be 4 hours or a day. And it gives you a good basis of where to start when thinking about how you pay people or how you pay yourself. And then you can also choose to up that amount. So if Carfax is saying for 4 hours, you pay $370 for someone to do a presentation. You'll know, that's the lowest denomination I should be paying someone. And then maybe you'll say, okay, well, I want to pay $500 instead. That's up to you, but at least it gives you, the baseline of what you should be putting in your budget and thinking about when you're paying somebody for their work or for their knowledge. Okay, and common questions that you'll see. So this is especially when you start applying to more of those equity seeking grants. So they're going to want to know, what work has your organization or have you as an artist done for X community? So when you answer this question, you're not only going to want to talk about your background or, what you're trying to do in that community or what you have done in that community. You want to reference specific projects. What did you do? What was the outcome? How did it improve that community? Get those key points in there as well. Why is your project needed? So this is where you can also think about, going back to those studies that you've seen, looking at Statistics Canada to plug in those numbers, those quantitative numbers to back up, why what you're doing is important, why it's significant. What social community does your project address? So you want to know, if you're going to a neighborhood, if you're doing something for the African population in your neighborhood, the Caribbean population in your neighborhood, specify that. Talk about, if you are someone of that community, you talk about your relationship to it. Also talk about why it's important for you to be doing this work. And describe how you're able to accomplish this project. So this specific question is really asking you, what is your capacity? Do you have a team of people that are going to help you to pull this off? Are you going to be collaborating with somebody else? Another organization, another person, another artist? Are you going to be bringing in other artists to help you accomplish this work? That's what this question is really addressing. They want to know that if they are to give you this funding, there's little to no doubt that you'll be able to use it to accomplish the task that you're setting out to do because you have certain things in place or have a plan of how to get these things in place. Okay, so now I want to open it up to questions. You can find me at Nico at oddsidearts.ca, and then my organization's page is oddsidearts.ca. And you can also email us at info@oddsidearts.ca if you have any questions or want to get involved with our organization, or you need some help in us, having an eye on one of the grants that you're working on. We also do that as well. We love, giving feedback and helping people think through their grants. So with that being said, I would love to hear, what are your questions, your experiences with grant writing? What are the things that you've sort of ran into a wall when thinking about, approaching funding?
May I?
Of course.
So how you doing, Nico?
I'm good. How are
Thank you very
you?
much for the presentation. It was excellent. I just wanted to point out the importance of getting to know the grant officers. Like literally on they know your face basis. I knew some years ago I was in communication with the dance officer at the Ontario Arts Council, and I was the one who went to him and pointed out that burlesque should be included as a discipline within the dance regimen. because it didn't occur to him.
Yeah.
And one of my girlfriends managed to get a grant the following year.
Amazing. See, that's amazing. Exactly. Yes. Talk to those grant officers.
Yeah.
Sometimes it helps open who can apply, as you just said.
Yeah, because there's always a new discipline coming into play, no matter what the art happens to be. You know, we're in dance, we're seeing freestyle, we're seeing, you know, or we can look backwards to the social dances, Lindy Hop, swing, whatever, you know, and they get forgotten because they're seen in a social context and not a performing context sometimes. So just a thought.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I'd also recommend, I know a lot of those grant offices have these webinars and these events that they do to help communities learn about what they're doing. Go to those, even if you feel like, I already know everything about TAC. Why am I going to this? It's a good way for you to meet to the grant officer. Sometimes people switch positions. Get them to know your face.
Yeah,
Get
and ultimately, as I've said many a time with these grant officers and granting bodies, we are taxpayers. We pay these people.
mhm.
So really, you know, you have the right to be able to use them.
Exactly. And sometimes they might ask you to be on a jury. And being
Yeah.
on a journey is a good way to know exactly what people are looking for. Because you yourself, you're going to be
Mhm.
judging people's grants to see, okay, who fits the bill. And that also helps inform you, okay, what are people looking for? Sometimes, less is more
Yeah.
succinct. They don't really want over explanation of what you're going to do. They want it to be more targeted.
Mm.
When you're submitting your reference images, making sure that everything you submit directly correlates to what you've written in your grant,
Right.
so they can see how those things connect.
All right. Thank you.
No problem. Anyone else want to share any insights or you have a question?
That's it. That's it. No one has any other questions? I have a question, Nico.
Mhm.
Could you speak some more about some of the ways that independent artists can think about like sourcing grants separate from organizations? 'Cause I think there's sometimes a bit more challenge for independent artists to source grants in comparison to like not-for-profit organizations, or should in your expertise, should artists who are not don't have a sort of structure of either a sole proprietorship or a not-for-profit, what should they do as it relates to their grants? Like I know, because I know like there's ad hoc collective possibilities,
Mhm.
there's stuff like that as well. Could you speak to some of that?
Yeah, ad hocs are actually really great if you want to access those larger pots of funding that maybe independently you might not be able to do. When you do those routes, you may be asked to like create a bank account in the name of your ad hoc. So keep that in mind, that you might also have to create a separate bank account and able to get that money to be able to use it on your project or initiative. I also suggest, speaking to your BIAs, speaking to your community organizations and pitching something other than, your art practice. Maybe it's a workshop that you can do based on your art practice and working from that route. Um, like I said, think about the services that go along with your art making. That can also become a way for you to expand the way you bring in revenue, the way you bring in income. It is difficult for individual artists to get grant funding, because even when I was researching, what are the funds out there, and thinking about, because most of the funds I applied to are organizational because we're running an organization. And I was thinking about individual artists and just kept finding all of these things that were geared towards not-for-profits or charities. And that becomes a really hard thing to navigate when you are an individual artist. And one of the routes might be to partner with a not-for-profit organization, and they become the trustee that can receive the money on behalf of you and give it to you to orchestrate what needs to be done. Or looking into things like the Toronto Public Library often works with artists. Working with the TDSB is another way for you to work as an artist and get into the schools and, you know, do your art practice that way. Corporations, a lot of artists have found big success working with various corporations like Facebook or Meta rather, with Meta. The NBA also has something that they put out around Christmas time where they get artists to submit like graphic or visual artists to submit images to use throughout the season. So really tapping into those spaces that are not arts focused, but have like a sort of a lean or incorporate arts in some way that you can sort of latch onto. And I see, Christine, you posted something for musicians. That's a good start there. And there's a website called Mentor Works that I believe where you can source grants. So that might be a good option as well.
Rachel, do you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question around the taxation of grants. If you have any information about like specifics surrounding how, as an independent artist or an organization, you should be putting your business expenses through, or like what is considered business income versus like are grants income? Are they a separate category? Any information around that?
Mm-hmm. So I know, are you talking about if you're applying independently or if you're applying as an organization?
I mean, either or. I'm an independent artist and also an organization, so I'm like all information is helpful, but I think for independent artists more specifically, if you're
Mm-hmm.
receiving a grant, is that considered, you know, under the same category as fee for service income, or is the CRA expecting a different line item? Can I deduct my business expenses out of a grant? Like, I don't feel like there's great information available online or
Mm-hmm.
even through the CRA. Even finding a qualified accountant or bookkeeper who really understands the nuances of artist expenses and grants. So I just wondered if you had any like information or
Mm-hmm.
specific suggestions around how to handle this money if you are successful with getting it.
Yeah. So I'm not the best person to answer that question. I think Kevin knows the answer, but I will say that there are various organizations that does do tax clinics or tax workshops for artists because of that problem. Nia does one, and there's another one that I saw recently, and if it was Artreach or another organization that was talking about taxes and how independent artists should think about their taxes and the grants that they receive. But I'm going to pass that off to Kevin.
Yeah. So I know, Rachel, haven't had this experience, even though you may get a grant for $40,000, let's say. Whatever is expensed out is not something you can claim. It's only whatever you get paid from that particular grant amount. Everything else becomes an expense, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So while you may be able to report $40,000, if you yourself as the artist have paid out $35,000, you cannot claim that as income because you've only made $5,000. So everything else becomes an expense.
Would you consider that all of this grant money is like gross income, and then minus expenses would create like the independent artist net income?
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. Okay, thank you.
And yes.
May I add to that? Just as a piece of information, I posted it in the chat. There's a gentleman by the name of Chris Evans, or Chris Enns, who runs a company called Rags to Reasonable. And he pretty much does like finance stuff for artists specifically. And he will meet with an artist once a month for free for half an hour. And you can pretty much talk any sort of money type stuff with him. The caveat is that his partner is having a baby, so he is on maternity leave until July. But he'll be available after that.
That is helpful. Thank you.
Yeah,
I'm
thank you
also
for
like,
sharing
is
that.
there a grant for that? Is there a grant for like, for that specifically? Is there a
For taxes?
bookkeeping, an accountant grant? Yes. Like,
I wish. Oh no, they never.
or if you got an operational grant, is that something that could be considered under like administrative
Yep.
fees?
If you can put your bookkeeping as a line item in your operational grant, and I encourage it. I encourage actually in all grants for you to designate a portion that's administrative. At least some grants will let you do a max of 10%. Some might let you do about 15. But to assist with that bookkeeping and the e-transfers, and if you have to get insurance, all of those logistical things.
Thank you.
Okay, that's a really good question. And you've brought up a beautiful point, Rachel, that we may take into another workshop series around taxation for artists. So thank you as well. If there's no more questions for Nico, we're at the end of this particular workshopping session. And I'll just give space where possible if you want to drop something in the chat, or if you want to come on screen. And if not, all right. So I want to say thank you, Nico, for an amazing, amazing session and a very informative one. And I want to thank you all for being here. All right. The next time I see you will be at the conference and festival, which will be at NIA. We'll be in person and where possible, hybrid. So thank you again, and we will see you the week of May 13th until the 16th.
Thank you, everybody. It was great speaking to all of you. And I hope I was helpful in showing you where to source some grants other than, the arts councils. And feel free to, hit me up. I'll put my email in the chat if you have any questions that you come to mind.
Thanks, Nico.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Have a
Kevin.
great evening and be safe out there with the little bit of snow that we've had. Talk about environmental changes. There's a grant for that. Take care, everybody.